Well, I'm delighted to be back. I enjoy doing workshops, and I've done a couple of them. And I just want to begin by acknowledging what a darn tough time this is to be looking for a job. I'm not going into the reasons. I think everybody knows them already, but my heart goes out to you if you're in a job search right this very second. I'm going to be talking about two topics, how to answer behavioral interview questions, and I'm also going to be talking about giving you some tips and some strategies for doing virtual interviews, which I think at this point in the world, almost anybody who's looking for a job is going to be online for at least one part of it or another. So, um, it's worth noting that in 2020 there was research that said that people doing interviews online did not come across as well. They didn't look as enthusiastic or energetic online and that kind of thing. And I imagine that's an awful lot better now that we've been through the pandemic and so much use of virtual platforms. But I think it's also something to keep in mind when you're interviewing because it's important for you to be able to come across, and you may have to go the extra mile to do that. Uh, okay, so I always good to start with the good news, and there is good news about interviewing. First of all, although a lot of people don't think of this necessarily, the employer or recruiter who called you for an interview, or HR person or whoever, they already think you're qualified. They're inviting you in because what they've seen is telling them that they want to talk to you and they want to make sure that what you've told them so far in your resume or application or whatever is a true reflection of you and what you can do for them, which makes it important for you in your job interview to connect, not so much sell, but connect so they can understand who you are and how you can contribute to their operation. Okay. Okay, I don't know why I didn't go. Okay. There's even more news about job interviews, and that is that job interviews, too often job seekers are thinking that the interviewer has all the power, it's great big judgment of me, and that sort of thing. But the truth is, an interview is two-way. And that is, it's your opportunity to see whether the organization, the job, the situation is one you feel comfortable in, and is it right for you? It's also, of course, an opportunity for you to shine and let them know what you have to offer them. But it's not all them, and it's important to remember that. I like this guy, just in case you're wondering. So we're going to start talking about behavioral interviews. So behavioral interviews, and I bet you've encountered these before. Behavioral interviews um, are questions that begin with, "Tell me about a time when." So these are questions where people are asking about a conflict you had with a coworker, a time you made a mistake, a time maybe you were given a task and you had no training for it. Maybe you were in a situation that was very difficult, but these are the kinds of questions. And the reason people ask them, recruiters and hiring officials ask them, is they want to get a feeling for how did you respond in that situation, in a tough situation we presented you. And that's to give them insight into how you're going to probably uh, respond in the future at their company. It's important to remember also that the questions are usually focus on the candidate, on you, the applicant. They're also not usually technical. And the reason for this is that behavioral interview questions are asking you about soft skills, communications, human relations skills, communication, time management, setting priorities, that kind of thing. They most often are not, how do you do this coding or that, or this or that. Okay. I'm okaying because my slide didn't go forward. Okay. Um, so the most frequent topics you're going to see in a behavioral interview are things like how did you respond, how did you respond, or what happened when you had a conflict with a coworker, or what happened with teamwork, or how did you do working under pressure, customer service, how flexible you are, how adaptable you are, and whether you have good, excuse me, time management skills. So one question that when you get an interview, you could ask yourself, you might be asking yourself is, what behavioral interview questions might an employer ask you? And those are the ones that a lot of times people say you cannot prepare for those. Well, I would beg to differ, and I'm going to give you a process here that you can use to help you prepare. No, I'm not, you are not, and I am not going to be able to tell you exactly what they're going to ask you, but this can get you closer. And I think closer is better than nothing. So you can begin by researching the organization, which hopefully you've already done, and you already have a good idea about the management's pain points and issues that are confronting them. Also, analyze the job description and responsibilities. And in view of the kinds of questions I just mentioned, what might they ask you? What are they saying in that job description that tells you what kind of a problem they're hoping you will solve as an applicant? So you can do some of the figuring out yourself. Another option is to use ChatGPT or one other AI program to provide questions for you to practice. I'm just going to take a moment to remind you when you're using ChatGPT not to put your personal information into it. Okay? So what I did here was to show you what output might be from a ChatGPT question about behavioral interview questions. And I asked ChatGPT to give me some behavioral interview questions for a shipping clerk position. So I put in the job description, or I could have, and it came out with a long list. This is only one. What you see on the screen, attention to detail, is only one of the probably 10 things they gave me with questions underneath. So you will certainly get some place to start. It'll be more specific if you put the job description in. But so you see the example here, it's attention to detail. Behavioral question. Tell me a time when you noticed an error in the shipping process. How did you catch it, and what steps did you take to correct it? Oops, sorry. Another, describe a situation where you had to carefully inspect products before shipping. How did you ensure the accuracy in the shipping process? Again, these aren't the world's most perfect questions, but hopefully they'll get you into the mindset of questions you might be asked so you can prepare for them. So I advocate that you start before you're there to craft your answer, and also that you make it a story, that you develop career stories. And if you've ever seen me before, you've heard me talk about this, that stories are remembered 22 times more than facts alone. This means that our friend Joe Friday was wrong from the point of view of interviewing. Facts are nice, we're not getting rid of them, but stories stick. So anyway, if you're going to create a story, here are some steps that I suggest you use. And again, this is practice. You're not in the interview setting, but it is what you're going to need to do when you're there. And what I'm saying here is think ahead of time about questions that they might ask you that may very well get you ready for the questions that they will ask you. So the first step is to decide what skill or experience that you want to talk about, and then choose a career story that highlights the important things about you, the actions, your experience, your skills, all that sort of thing. And I will caution you, I have a colleague who had a client who came back and said, I was in the middle of my career story and I realized I was telling a story about when about when I got fired. And I don't know if he was able to change course on that, but that is a good reason to think ahead of time because that is absolutely not what you want to do. You want to develop a story that tells you what you did in the situation and try if you can to be talking about you rather than the team. I'm not saying to leave the team out, but the emphasis should be on the team. On the team. Don't listen to me. On you. Uh, okay. So I'm assuming that many of you are aware of and familiar with the STAR approach to resume writing to interviewing and that sort of thing. And STAR, if you remember, it is situation, task, action, result. And I'm going to introduce you to a slightly different approach, which is called CART. And I think you're going to like it. And of course, if you hate it, you don't have to use it. Um, CART asks you to talk about first the challenge, action you took, the results, and this is what makes it different, the tie back. The tie back is about you're telling the story and you're tying it back to what they asked about, what you learned, what you'll do better next time, and that sort of thing. It's similar in this case to the way you might answer a question about weaknesses or strengths, probably weaknesses. So here I'm walking you through the process of uh, putting together a CART response. So the challenge was I forgot to confirm a meeting for an important high visibility meeting for C-suite executives and their staff. The room was double booked. It was due to a mess up, error. But the important part of this was there was real potential for conflict with another team. That's why it was important. So I quickly spoke to the conference room manager to identify the problem and propose a solution. And the results were that I resolved the problem and then made plans to prevent double booking. Here's the tieback. The tieback is I now know how important it is to keep track of conference room scheduling, especially for high visibility meetings. I introduced a new process and reduced errors by simplifying the room reservation process. So I'm not saying you say it this way, but this is the planning process. Does anybody have questions about that?
I had some,
Yeah.
yeah, there's no questions about that at this point. Wait,
Oh,
okay, so someone said, really like cart. However, this example leads with forgetting something. I'm not sure I would lead with that. Instead, have an external challenge that you resolved. What do you think, Anne?
I think they're asking you for something you did that you failed.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't come back with a question that said, I didn't fail.
Okay.
You see? So there,
Mm-hmm.
the actual question says, tell me a time you failed.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can avoid talking about times you failed, but I think if you don't say you did something wrong or you failed, you're not answering the question. And you
Okay.
need to answer the question. And I think you mitigate it with the tieback. I realize
Okay.
I did something wrong. I did
Mm-hmm.
this to change it. And so therefore I learned from that and things got better. And that's what you
Okay.
want to end. Okay.
Okay. And,
Does that make
mhm,
sense?
yes.
Okay.
And then someone said a little earlier on, they said, what if you're ready for your second interview and they don't show up? And so someone in chat said, reach out to them. It happened to me once. And after 15 minutes, I reached out. The interviewer did not have my phone number. They were happy that I reached out and gave me the edge because it showed that I was really interested. You know,
Mm,
they're human. Sometimes things happen like that. Other times,
mm,
there are times, and we have to admit that they do ghost, even on a second interview. It has happened. I've heard, but if
right.
I mean, your suggestion, and I mean, I would certainly, if you're waiting for the second interview and they're not showing up, I would certainly reach out to them. Um,
Absolutely. Too
yes.
many things can go wrong in the world. And so I think this is a time when you give them the benefit of the doubt. And chances are somebody's going to go, oh my God, you know. Um,
Exactly. Maybe their internet went down, who
so,
knows? And they had a Zoom call
right,
or,
right, right.
you know, um,
Yes.
and someone said, this is a good suggestion when you're getting ready for an interview. I type and print out anticipated questions with my answers for reference during my Zoom interview. That's
Sure.
good plan, a good plan.
Mm.
Um, yeah. So,
I think it's what I usually when I make a suggestion about planning for interviews. My feeling about it is you can type it, you can write it on paper, you can use crayons, whatever. Whatever it is, using your mind to get something down so it's tangible, it's visible. Okay?
hmm.
So,
Okay.
okay. So,
Okay.
moving on. Like so many other things I've said about interviewing, it's a good idea to get familiar and practice your stories. You don't want to memorize them. You don't want to be reading from paper. You can practice with a friend if you have a friend. If you have a friend that would be nice to you. I did have a client who was practicing an interview with a friend, and the friend just trashed her interview. So I wanted to go slap the friend, but I don't know who it was. So anyway, try and find somebody who's going to be nice to you. Another option is to record yourself if that doesn't make you go nuts, or to do a solo Zoom interview. So all of those things you can do, whatever makes you comfortable. For myself, if I'm practicing something, I don't record it. I just do it. I talk it. But that's me. That's what I like. And then my other suggestion is that if you have a calm cat or dog, you can practice with them. And they will not trash your interview or your question or your answer. I
And
guarantee it. So,
someone asked, for anyone recently interviewing, are you finding many, or fewer interviews done virtually? So, what do you say to that?
are you asking me?
Yeah, yeah, that's someone was
I
asking that.
I would say a lot,
Hmm.
a lot, but I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah,
I don't know. I just don't think people are going into offices until fairly late into the process.
yeah. I mean, I think virtual interviewing is here to stay. It might not be
Absolutely.
every one of the interviews, but even if your job is fully in person, you will have one of your interviews for that job virtually.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah,
what that
might be
yeah.
on the phone.
Hmm.
That's very old fashioned, but people do it.
Right.
So it might
Hmm.
be on the phone, but yes, I think if you think you're going to go through a job search without something online, be it Zoom or whatever, I think that is a delusion.
Right.
So that's Ann Poritzky's opinion, however.
I agree with you. We at the Career Gateway agree with you.
So so anyway, I want to take the rest of my time to talk about being successful, improving your success with virtual interviews. And I think that you're talking about three different big buckets of information here. One is your appearance and authenticity. Um, Another is background and lighting. And the third is your voice. But before I say anything else, if you're in a virtual interview and not using your phone, I realized later that you might be using your phone for the interview. But if you are not using your phone for the interview, turn the phone off, silence it, and turn it off, turn it over so you can't see. I don't know about your family and friends, but mine have a knack for ringing I think I forgot to turn off my phone for today, so I'm about to turn it off because you just don't, it'll take your train of thought and take it on a journey so that you don't want it to go. Um, anyway, so let's talk about those a little bit. Okay, appearance. Now, frankly, in the old days, I think it was a lot easier to dress for an interview. You just kind of knew if you were going into an office, you wore, a dress suit or a blazer or this and that and the other thing. And I don't think it's so easy anymore. And I'd be interested in what people have to say about this. But it may be worth your time to try and find out what do they wear there. And that may not be easy, but you might be able to ask a recruiter You might ask somebody who works there. But last but not least, you can take a look at their website, see what people are wearing in any events they put up on their website. So, um, another practical idea is to avoid distracting patterns on your background or your background. So you don't want the attention to not be, you want it pretty well boring around you. Um, you want to put your laptop at eye level. So in the case with me here right now, I have my camera at my eye level. So it looks, I hope, it looks like I'm looking right at you, which I am, of course. Um, another clue is to use gestures. So even though you can't shake hands, put your hand out as if you were going to shake, pretend like, and then they'll get the message. That's connecting. That's being authentic. But you also can um, wave or nod or show your hand, your show hands is also. There's some research on this, but I don't have it on me. But that's a something to remember. Another thing here is oh, I forgot one thing about the other page. I am going to strongly suggest that you don't use either blur or a virtual background. And the reason for this is, first of all, when you're in blur, you put your arms out like this, or you move something and you disappear, which I think is a little disconcerting. The other thing about a virtual background is they take a lot of system resources. And I've noticed here today that the system, the internet, the strength of the internet has come and gone. It's been up and down for different people, not just me. So I wouldn't take that risk. I would definitely look at clearing out an area and making it so, see what I mean? Yes. No. Uh, it's basically that you set up a space that is going to be fine. It doesn't have to be, the Taj Mahal. And I just recently had somebody I was coaching, and she said, "Oh, I can't sit here." She had a desk in front of a bookcase. So she had a bookcase around here. And what I said to her was, your bookcase is fine. You have to or I suggested that she take there were like clumps of paper that looked disorganized on the shelves. So I suggested she take them away, and then it was fine. So then no virtual interview, no virtual background and stuff like that. Another clue is to mirror and match the posture and energy level of the people you're talking to. And that is, if they seem energetic, if they have a certain posture, or, they're leaning up so their face is so close to the screen, whatever, try and match that. That's another way of subtly, non-verbally connecting. And the same with energy level. If the person is talking at a pretty good rate of speed, then try and follow them. You don't have to follow them exactly, but it's the idea that you're non-verbally doing what they're doing. The other suggestion is to sit at the front of your chair so you don't have a chance to, do this. And you probably won't. Another way to prevent that is a standing desk. Now, needless to say, the guy on the top left is not what I want you to do in your next interview. But I'm here, this is to emphasize how important the backlighting is and the lighting is. And this is one of the things that's driven me kind of nuts during pandemic times and getting used to Zoom. I actually brought a external light and that sort of thing for today. Today I'm using natural light out of a window, which is often best for me. We talked about virtual background, so we're not going to talk about that, but it's a good idea to make sure your background looks professional. It doesn't have to be fancy. I was doing an interview workshop with people who were in a shelter. So they did not have the ideal background, but they had interviews. And so what they did was they put a sheet up in the back. So it was a blank white back, and the person interviewed in front of that. And it was fine. And they didn't have to say I'm in a homeless shelter. So you do what you do. I'm in a hotel room. This is a TV. And because I'm talking about this, I've been certifiably nuts on the subject of what was my background going to look like and et cetera today. So you can send me feedback on your, um, but anyway, oh, I'm in a room that doesn't have a desk. There is no desk in this hotel room. Have you ever heard of that? Anyway, uh, last but not least here is your voice. And your voice is, of course, a really important aspect of the way you present yourself. And most of us, I dare say, don't really think about our voice very much when we're talking. We just talk. But you do want to watch your volume and kind of again match what you're match the person you're talking to. Obviously, if they're screaming, if there's somebody who's you don't have to do that, but you may raise your voice a little bit. Your voice tone is the way you use your voice to express to convey meaning and express emotions. You've already heard the saying, it's not what you said, but how I'm mad because not but why what you said, but how you said it. They're talking about voice tone. Okay. You're probably going to guess this one is about pace. Again, try and moderate your pace if that's the way the person you're talking to talks. If they're a faster talker, then do that. So you're going to try and moderate that. And I do want to take a moment to talk about enunciation. And that is that it's a good thing to check for yourself. A fellow career counselor said that she noticed about herself that she was dropping the ends of words because she was talking so fast. And so she started practicing, not in interviews and not working with clients, but to try and remember to enunciate the entire word. So, and she said that she thought that helped her with her enunciation. So, um, I am ready for questions.
Okay, I'm just looking. People have asked about, and during their virtual interviews, what do you do about pets? And sometimes if you put them out of your office space or your space, then they want to come in and start scratching the door. And so, do you have any suggestions with regards to the
I
surroundings?
I think there are a lot of things in life it's important to not have your pet right there. And I think this is a preparation thing because you just don't want to look like you've got remember that television reporter whose kids ran into his room? He was on some fancy British television channel. So I would say I would practice prevention if you can get a friend to take your pet for a little while you have your interview. I'm risk averse, so I would tend to say if there's any chance at all that the dog is coming, I would try to prevent it.
Okay. Okay. Again, if anyone has questions for Anne for this presentation, please put them in chat. They will be addressed. Someone was saying, she meant, yes, Anne said enunciation. Yes. They were just talking about, clarification. Let's see.
Oh, what is
Uh,
enunciation? Is
yes.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
it's basically clearly saying your words in a way that you are saying the whole word and it is
Exactly.
clear to the person listening. This can be an issue for people who speak English is for whom English is not their first language.
Mm-hmm.
And on both sides, the person interviewing and the interviewer. But chances are, if you've gotten to this point in life, as an adult, you probably know if you have issues with enunciation just because of body language you've seen and I'm not just saying job interview in life. It's the kind of thing if people say to you often, can you repeat that? I don't think I understood that, or whatever they say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, that's a cue to you that that's something you need to work on.
Okay. I have now we're getting some really great questions. Thank you all.
Okay.
Um, um, if an interviewer is being dismissive or talking over you, how do you deal with this?
The rule of thumb is to ask a question. Ask a question, get them to try, let's face it, some people are really rude. Honest to goodness, I think people are more rude today than they have been at other times. But that's Ann Poritzky's opinion. But what generally speaking, if you ask them a question, they will re-engage and answer the question. If they're so outstandingly rude that that doesn't work, you may have big questions about whether you want to work there,
Right,
you know.
exactly, exactly.
But before I say that, it depends on who it is. I
Mhm.
say the same thing as far as when somebody asks you an illegal question. Sometimes people think, you hear about this. People said that was an illegal question. They stand up, they walk out the door. My suggestion to you is to go for the offer. It's good and refuse it if you know you don't want to work. But you might be dealing with somebody you will never see again. So,
Exactly.
and it might be a perfectly good job. So, and remember how distressing it is and time wasting it is for them to offer you a job and you to say no. So go for the offer and then say no if truly what happened was something that you think is systemic or would happen again. But walking out, storming out of an interview, I really don't recommend.
Well, I agree. I agree. Um, um, so, and another question: to achieve the right aesthetics to present ourselves well during the interviews, do you have recommended microphone and camera devices for our computers?
Um,
And you do not have to spend a lot of money, guys.
no,
Yeah.
we had a situation where on one of our now dead computers, the audio never worked. And so we just bought an auxiliary camera, which I'm using, but you can't see, and it had sound in it. It had a microphone in it, and that completely solved the problem, and it's not a lot. And I met with somebody who does video, teaches people about video, and I was using the camera in my computer, the internal integrated camera, and she said that the external camera was much better. So I am using so if I have a meeting or I don't always do this when I'm talking to my kids, but when I'm talking to someone important, I will put the camera on because I got that feedback. So,
hmm hmm and that's the question. Would you recommend practicing interviews by recording yourself and playing it back?
I would say yes, unless it drives you out of your mind to hear your own voice. But
And
I
you can.
think the act of doing it makes a lot of sense. I really
hmm
do.
hmm
Because it's different when you write, you're writing, but for me, when you're putting your mouth around the words, that is powerful in terms of teaching you to do it. So,
Someone asked, do you suggest getting fully dressed versus top half dressed on virtual interviews?
oh,
Totally.
so here's the deal. There are all these rumors in career circles, which I have a feeling are, whatever, they're not necessarily true about these horror stories when somebody was asked to stand up and they had their underwear on. My suggestion is not, what I tell you is that is very unlikely to happen. However, look at how you will feel if you are fully dressed and ready for a professional meeting. So that is my suggestion. The other thing is when at the beginning of the pandemic, I was a marketing major. I was so, laughing out loud because Walmart reported that many more tops were being purchased than bottoms, which I thought was hysterical. But my advice is to be in a professional
Exactly.
look from top to bottom. That's why I'm
So,
wearing shoes, even though you're never going to see them.
mhm,
So you feel the part. That's my
exactly.
opinion.
Exactly. And we agree, we concur with that as well, Anne, at the Career Gateway.
Mhm.
Someone asked, is it terrible to ask, can I record the interview to use for teaching purposes? I would say no, don't. But go ahead, Anne. What's
I
your
would
your
suggest no. I
yeah,
would suggest no.
yeah, they would be wondering why are you recording
Unless
this?
the only place that I would say yes is if you have a client maybe who's with some sort of a disability and you're asking that as an accommodation.
Oh,
So
okay.
that is, if you have a neurodiverse client who this would work for them in a way. I'm not that familiar with what people ask for in terms of accommodations. The only way I would do it is if that was something that would allow the person to perform better because of a disability.
Okay, here's a good question. Anne, I have an interview coming up and they have stated the position has more hours than I want to work. How do I negotiate that without sounding unwilling to work? I would like to work 20 hours per week. They stated that they may want up to 32 hours. I wouldn't say anything until you make you an offer, but Anne, go ahead.
Well, let me say that I totally agree. Basically, you don't want to talk, you're going in for a job interview
Mhm.
for something they say is part-time with addition.
Mhm.
Okay. And what I would suggest to you is wait till they love you. You are the best thing since sliced bread. They
Mhm.
really, really want you. And I suggest that's when you bring up that you don't really want to work the extra hours. It could be a no go thing, however. And so but you also can ask questions in the interview that might give you a better sense for that. Like, how often do you think um, you'd be asking me, would it be all the time? Is it weekends? Is it nights? I think you can ask questions like that about the job. I think if you say, I absolutely won't work extra hours, I think that doesn't reflect well on you.
Right.
Um, but
And yeah,
again, negotiate.
but
Um,
don't start negotiating before they have made you a job offer.
right,
I mean,
exactly.
you
And
don't
I
have
guess I would
to.
think to myself, what am I willing to accept? They're saying there are times we need you. And the question is it all the time? But also, you might be able to put a boundary on, I would do this and this, but I prefer not to do that. All after you have an offer. So
Exactly, exactly. Um, how do you know if jobs hire people with disabilities? Oh, yeah.
that's a good question. That's a good question.
I mean, if you need we would
I
say,
think maybe the question is if you need how do you know if
yeah,
they will meet accommodations? I think
right.
that's a different, and I think
I
that's a question that you could answer.
yeah, I
And
would
that is,
yeah. I mean,
go ahead, go ahead.
I think that I mean, if you if unless it impact unless you need an accommodation, I would not bring up a disability in an interview. Unless there's some,
Absolutely.
so there's no reason. They don't need to know, health issues. They don't need to know any of that. That is not their business,
No.
and keep that private. If you
Yeah,
and but if you need an accommodation to do your job, then that would be something that you would need to discuss, obviously. But if you don't need any accommodation, no need to ever to bring that up. And do you have any?
absolutely. I completely agree. And I think in previous administrations, nobody would blink an eye if you asked for an accommodation, such as, sound or, something for your computer or or something along like that line, standing desk, which are more popular now. Um, but I think that is when they love you. And you say, that's part of your negotiation.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and I had a coworker who and this is before people did telework, but she had a telework agreement and her bosses really hated it, but it was all computer work. She didn't have to be present. Um, and that is the kind of thing that you need to talk about in an interview. She had a disability, so she was uncomfortable being in the office. But all of that kind of thing. There are now mandatory things that an employer has to do, but whether they will or not, especially with the tenor of the times, is a very good question.
Mm, yes.
It
Yes.
was
Yes.
just a note
Yes.
where in the place I worked, it was a no-brainer. They would do. You
Hmm.
needed the stuff for your software, so if you couldn't see or you couldn't hear, you know, I needed a special chair, they got it for me.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. The
And
tenor
it
of the
wasn't a
time.
biggie. But
Exactly.
again, the times are different and you'd have to see where you are.
Someone asked, how do I explain gaps in going backwards in my career? I changed my resume to only show the last 5 years, limiting my time home with the kids, but it skips important skills from before. And
I think you can explain a gap, and you can explain a gap. I don't know if Mara is going to be on one of, oh, she's not on, we're not doing reviews. But yeah, everybody has gaps. And so you can, if you did any kind of volunteer work, any kind of taking classes, anything you did there, you put that in and you don't say, I was taking care of my kids. Um,
but if you are a
but
stay
the
if you are a stay-at-home parent and I mean, obviously there are
you
many
helped with
there are many stay-at-home parents who
F's,
take time off and you garner skills during that time. You can
right.
definitely
You
put
can
those skills
absolutely,
on
and
your
I
resume.
advocate if you were a volunteer and you were the chairperson of the fundraiser that made amount of money, then absolutely. And I put that in as a job on a
Yes,
resume. So
yes,
I put that in as a job, you know, chair love fundraising, you know, etc. And so anything she can do like that,
mhm,
any kind of educational stuff. And the other
mhm,
thing is to address the thing about you know, you're losing some skills. You don't have to put dates on it. You can just say additional experience and talk about some of those skills, you
exactly. And
know.
if you were a caregiver,
Yes,
you garnered skills during that caregiving. You did
exactly.
X, Y, and Z. You want to talk about that. But
Absolutely.
do not discuss if it's your health that you took time away. Do not need
Right.
to discuss your health.
You're running laps now. Yeah,
Do not discuss health. It's not their
absolutely.
not
You
their
really
business.
don't. And I had somebody in resume reviews who who was very concerned about not disclosing an illness that is now solved that he didn't know he had. And I'm like, no, 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 no.
None of their
So
business. How do
none of
you
their business.
how do
Go
you
ahead.
respond? How do you respond when an interviewer asks the year of your college graduation, probably determine your age?
Oh, I would go with why do you ask? That, you know, that I would just say, I'm not sure what, well, you could go with, I'm not sure how that, um, you know, why that's relevant. Can you tell me why, how does that, let me see, I'm doing off the top of my head here, which you have to do in an interview. Um, I would say, I'm wondering why you asked that question. I don't see how it's related to the job, except if you're talking about getting your computer science degree in 1971 and it's 2025, that might be a legitimate question.
Mhm, mhm.
But what I would do is I would try and what I talk about with illegal or strange questions is try and find out the intent of the question, either by answering the intent of the question or asking about what the intent of the question is.
Um, sure.
So it may
Um,
or may not be, it may or may not be age, but probably.
yeah, that's true. Um, and this is talking about what you can say on your in your interview or your resume. This person, we had touched upon this. This person resigned from their last role to care for their parents, both of whom were experiencing major health issues. I did some consulting during this period, but there's still a gap on my resume. I've been advised not to say that I left my job to care for my family in interviews. What is your perspective? Well, one, if if that caretaking issue is over,
Over.
and you could there's I don't see any reason why you could not say that you stepped away to care for your parents. That would show that
Yep.
you were dedicated and committed
Right.
and
Um,
and your perspective.
I really agree with you. I think now it was much, much better right after, well, I know we're not done with the pandemic, but let's just say the active time of the pandemic, I think just after that, I think employers really got it. And if you said, I took time off because schools were closed, I took time off to care for somebody who was sick, etc., that was, yeah, go ahead, don't worry about it. These days, I think you can still say, I took time away to work with my parent, to take care of my parents. They don't need the care anymore. And so I'm fully available to work. If there was any consulting, that's the emphasis. That's the
Okay. Okay.
emphasis. So
And
even if it was 20% of your time, you were still doing it at that time for people who are hung up on chronology, which many people are.
one final question, because then Anne,
Yeah,
do you have a few minutes to jump into chat?
sure, sure, sure.
Okay.
I plan
Okay.
to. And
Okay. So
also, I have my email address up on this slide, and I'm happy to hear from people. I have before when I've done other. Um, can I do a self promo plug? I did
yes,
a well, I
of
did an
course.
interview. I did an workshop, an expo workshop on answering tough questions, which you can access. And I only did behavioral interviewing today, but I did other tough questions in June. And you can write to me or Anne and get the link to that. Okay, self plug. And yes,
Okay.
yes,
Okay.
I'll answer questions.
Last question, because I'll tell you where we've left off. And
Okay.
again, someone said, "Do I wait?" I was scheduled for a phone interview. They didn't show. In my follow up, I was told the position is now on hold, and I think that's happening with a lot of jobs. And your feeling on that one?
Yeah, I think now more than ever, because things are so chaotic and
Mm-hmm.
nobody knows if they work there, if they don't, or if there's a contract, or if there isn't. I sure wouldn't take that one personally these days. And but I would continue to follow up, continue to say you're interested. Don't bug them because they're busy. But I think absolutely, uh, and it may never happen. That's what's happening in this town right now and in
Exactly.
government and government contractors. And, as I said, my heart goes out to you. And,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but I would not take that personally at all,
Right. Right. And then
at all.
I'm going to ask you this question because I want people to hear, because this is a well asked question. How do you respond if the first question is, "What are your salary requirements?" and they have given you a broad range of what they might pay?
They have given you a range?
They said they in this
I'm
scenario
sorry.
they have given you a range. However,
Okay.
sometimes they don't, and and then there's the question of, they really are not supposed to ask you what you made in your
I hate,
last
and
job.
let me go on record as saying I hate this question because it's such a game. Okay. But you notice that I have less than no influence. But what I would say to you is there's no tried and true. So you've got to do what you're comfortable with. What we what I suggest to you is if they give you a range, you can say, I think I can work in that range. That range sounds right to me. Remember
Hmm.
the range, you're probably getting the bottom. So keep that in mind. The other thing you can say is, I much prefer to talk about salary and compensation after I know more about the job.
Mm.
So, um, another is, here's one I wouldn't ever do, uh, that I heard recommended. So you might hear it recommended. I won't tell you my salary for my previous job because it's personal. So that's one I would never do.
But
Okay.
in many jurisdictions, it is illegal for them. It's discriminatory if they ask you what you made in your last job, because it's a disparate
Right.
impact.
They're
That's
not,
just
the thing is, they're not supposed to. And the question really is, are you going to take that one question and say, well, that's it, I'm done, I don't want this job? Or are you going to roll with it, waste their time if you don't want the job, go through, get an offer, and say no? Okay, so the salary question. Two things, one that I'm suggesting. One, if they give you a range, then say yes or no to the range. Remember the range, you probably get the bottom. but it may be a range. The second thing is I prefer to talk, however you say this, these are my words. I'd prefer to talk about this after I learn more about the job. And another thing to do is to ask about the budget. If they haven't given you a range, ask for the budgeted range of the job. Okay, sorry
Excellent.
about long-winded here. Do salary research before you get there. Okay, go on some of these websites, salary.com, and even LinkedIn, even places that they list jobs. You can see what people are paying. Sometimes the ranges are so big they're ridiculous. I understand that. But there are actually salary information websites. So you can say, from my research, this kind of position pays this, or I would stay with ranges. But it makes you sound people are really, this question makes the very assertive unassertive. They're all of a sudden like, because for a whole reason, lots of mindsets can get in the way. But if you have done your research and you've done everything you can to find out what they were planning to pay, you can say, my research shows that this kind of position in this area of the country usually pays this. And again, I would go with a range. Does that help?
Yeah, I think so. I do. So
Yeah.
we are now, unfortunately, we're up for time, Anne.